I, Lucas, at the age of 32, typically go online to delve into discussions about conspiracy theories, finding them a fascinating way to occupy my time. Active participation in writing and creating content on the internet is uncharacteristic for me. Yet, despite uncertainty about its potential reach and impact, I feel compelled to express my thoughts at this stage of my life. I dread discovering the world of loneliness, having already experienced it to some extent. Learning new hobbies has been crucial for my self-discovery, and I believe that writing can become another creative outlet for me. Now let me introduce you to my wife, whom we will call Kaylee. Kaylee and I crossed paths while studying at university. She aspired to become a psychotherapist and was pursuing a psychology degree. In contrast, I chose business, lacking a clear direction and succumbing to parental pressure. Looking back, I feel those 4 years were wasted, as I only earned a bachelor's degree in business management and now work in the construction industry. Our initial bond wasn't particularly strong. We ended up in the same circle of friends, with our communication consisting of brief conversations. Notably, she had a boyfriend at the time, so we never considered each other romantically. At least, she didn't. But deep down, I think I always had feelings for her. I vividly remember when she dyed her hair dark blue in her second year. I was amazed at my reaction upon seeing her. Under certain lighting, her hair appeared black, but when sunlight hit it, the true color shone brightly, beautifully framing her face. Kaylee had mesmerizing big brown eyes, and whenever someone surprised her, she'd try to open them even wider. She exuded a unique aura, blending stunning beauty with an earthy hippie vibe, and always showed an amazing sense of purpose in everything she did at university. I admired her constant dedication to her studies and her ability to balance social life with academic responsibilities. From the moment we first met, I had to suppress any emotions I felt for her. She was deeply passionate about her boyfriend, who, it must be emphasized, was a real tyrant. Everyone but her saw his manipulative and toxic influence. Our friends noticed how possessively he clung to her, glaring at us during long conversations and hugging her tighter when we were close. It baffled me how she couldn't see Mark's true nature. Even now, my doubts linger. To even the most inattentive observer, Mark was a manipulator and a scoundrel. Despite this, I respected their relationship and kept an emotional distance. I played the role of a loyal friend, always there to listen during her moments of loneliness and to lift her spirits. Watching her gradual deterioration was heart-wrenching, but I knew the decision to leave Mark had to come from her. No matter how much I tried to persuade her, the final decision was always hers. Then, one fateful day, everything changed for Kaylee. Mark's true nature was revealed when he exploded with anger and physically assaulted her. It was a shocking and terrifying moment that would forever remain in her memory. Fortunately, it was the first and last instance of such violence. Finding her strength, Kaylee finally decided to leave him. Our friends, driven by righteous anger, secretly plotted to confront Mark. But Kaylee, exhausted by all forms of cruelty, insisted we respect her wishes and refrain from any further interference. That evening, seeking solace, Kaylee asked to stay at my place. Although I offered to sleep on the floor, she insisted we share the bed. This marked a turning point in our relationship. Understanding the gravity of her experience, I refrained from confessing my feelings. I wasn't insensitive. Rather, I gave her time and space to heal from 2 years of unexpected pain. I remained by her side during this period of change. Kaylee and I naturally began spending more time together. As we grew closer, we drifted away from the larger group. It wasn't a conscious decision to pull away. I believed Kaylee appreciated my unwavering support during her toughest times. Together, we embarked on exciting adventures, discovering new hobbies and exploring places outside the university. As our relationship deepened, so did my feelings for her, which both thrilled and worried me. I doubted she would ever see me as more than a friend, especially since a year had passed without significant changes in our relationship. One seemingly ordinary evening, as I walked Kaylee to her dorm, she surprised me by gathering the courage to ask me out. In that moment, she poured out her heart, confessing her feelings for me. In a whirlwind of emotions, I reciprocated. That's how our wonderful journey together began. Though it seemed we had already built a strong foundation through our shared experiences, Our bond grew stronger every day. In our final year at university, we spent countless hours studying side by side, constantly supporting each other. Kaylee understood that our relationship went beyond mere romance. It had the potential to grow into something deeper and more enduring. At first, I thought about giving up the chosen course, but Kaylee stubbornly refused to let me leave, so we both persevered and graduated from university together. Kaylee wasted no time pursuing her dream of becoming a therapist, and I decided to take up construction. Surprisingly, I was pleased with this decision. The physical nature of the work brought me great satisfaction, especially the joy of building alongside my dedicated colleagues. Kaylee and I continued to support each other's choices, constantly encouraging each other along the way. Over time, our relationship only strengthened. We took important steps by getting to know each other's parents. Initially, my parents were very disapproving of Kaylee, but gradually they fell in love with her as much as I did. Conversely, Kaylee's parents welcomed me with open arms from the very beginning. With our family's support, we created a powerful dynamic that allowed us to imagine a real future together. 4 years passed since graduation. Confident in our relationship, we decided to pool our funds and move to a spacious apartment in the heart of the city. We were sure we had taken all the necessary steps. We took our time, met, and got to know each other deeply. Unfortunately, our initial happiness didn't last long. After 2 years of living together, I began to notice significant changes in Kaylee's behavior. She became more distant, refused physical intimacy in bed, and avoided our once cherished morning ritual of breakfast together. At first, I attributed these changes to the stress she faced at work. Being a psychotherapist, she couldn't openly discuss her clients, which probably weighed heavily on her shoulders. Perhaps she felt overwhelmed and helpless in the face of all this. Trying to be close to her, I offered constant support. I cooked her lunch, suggested spontaneous trips when we both had free time, and even arranged relaxing evenings with a warm bath, her favorite book, and a glass of wine. Despite all my efforts, the emotional distance between us continued to grow, and I became increasingly anxious about her true state of mind. Her behavior continued to deteriorate. There were evenings when she came home late, obviously intoxicated, and made loud, unpleasant noises as she climbed into bed. This was something I had never encountered before, even during our university days. Adding to my concern, I sometimes found male guests in the house when I returned home. Kaylee dismissively waved them away when I tried to express my growing concerns. Whenever I mustered the courage to share my feelings, Kaylee dismissed them as drama, ignoring my attempts to understand or solve the problem. In response to my concerns, Kaylee contemptuously remarked that I should develop my own social life and stop being so clingy. It hurt me deeply to hear her dismiss my emotions, especially given the solid foundation we had built together. The sudden change in her behavior left me completely perplexed. We had always prided ourselves on open and honest communication, but now it seemed she was hiding something from me. Realizing a direct approach might be necessary to uncover the truth, and understanding the importance of not making her feel pressured, I approached the conversation with caution, trying to find a delicate balance. One evening, as we sat together on the sofa, I noticed she positioned herself on the opposite side, no longer nestled comfortably between my legs. Gathering my thoughts, I mustered the courage to touch on the topic, carefully choosing my words. I asked if something was bothering her, inquiring gently if anything had happened or if she wanted to discuss something. Unfortunately, her response was a simple and disappointing no, without even looking me in the eye. She left everything as it was, leaving me confused and insecure. Looking back, I should have realized the need for space and distance between us, but foolishly, I continued the conversation despite the growing tension. I suggested we consider therapy, hoping that under the guidance of a professional, she might find a safe and open environment for self-expression. I expressed this idea with sincere concern, but Kaylee's expression showed disbelief and disgust. My heart sank when she practically mocked me, belittling and ridiculing me for daring to suggest such a thing. Her words stung, leaving behind a feeling of helplessness and resentment. Kaylee vehemently rejected the idea of therapy, convinced that everything was fine with her and that the problem lay with me. Her words struck a deep blow, and I felt wounded and defeated. Without saying another word, I quietly went to bed, drowning in a sea of emotions. The next morning, I silently left for work before she woke up. My colleagues noticed my early arrival and sensed the sadness weighing on me. Unable to contain my pain any longer, tears streamed down my face. At that vulnerable moment, I felt weak and lonely. Tears continued to fall as I tried to comprehend that my girlfriend's love for me seemed to have vanished. After many years of what appeared to be a carefree, harmonious life, I found myself at a loss, unable to pinpoint where our relationship had taken a wrong turn. Inner turmoil gnawed at my soul, causing nausea and a sense of failure. Sharing my heartache with friends initially intensified these emotions, as I feared condemnation or ridicule for my tears. But to my surprise, their reaction was filled with empathy and compassion. Instead of telling me to be strong or laughing at my tears, they comforted me, gently patting me on the back, offering solace in their understanding. While continuing to work together, my friends listened attentively to the problems I faced in my relationship. Almost immediately, the thought of the possibility of cheating on Kaylee's part came to their minds. Quickly dismissing this idea, I resolutely defended her honesty, rejecting such suspicions. Despite the noisy background of the rumbling machinery, we managed to delve into this topic and discuss it as best we could. We agreed to meet later to continue the discussion in a more relaxed setting. Having such friendly support gave me a much-needed sense of comfort. That evening, feeling a renewed strength, I decided to dress up and go out. After splashing on my favorite cologne and wearing my comfortable blue jeans, I prepared to visit a local bar. I felt a spark of cheerfulness as I put effort into my appearance. When Kaylee asked about my plans, I frankly told her that I was meeting with work colleagues for a drink. Her reaction seemed indifferent, as if she wasn't interested in my whereabouts. As I approached the bar, to my pleasant surprise, all my colleagues were there. We sat down, ordered drinks, and began talking. They started sharing their stories, drawing remarkable parallels between their experiences with past partners and Kaylee's behavior. The more they talked, the deeper the feeling of confirmation and understanding settled within me. One particular story struck me, about a betrayal that my friend's brother had faced. The parallels between the behavior described and Kaylee's recent actions were alarming. His brother had been devastated and sought solace in their parents' home while he slowly recovered. This was supposed to be a wake-up call, a moment of revelation that shook me to the core. Despite the growing evidence, I stubbornly held on to my faith in Kaylee. Even though our relationship had its difficulties, I firmly believed she would never stoop so low. I appreciated my friend's advice, but decided not to act on their suspicions. As a last attempt to allay my fears, they suggested I look at Kaylee's phone or perhaps read her personal diary. The thought of invading her privacy made me uneasy, and I resolutely refused. Although they respected my decision, I felt their sincere concern for my well-being. Despite the complexity of the situation, I don't regret anything because this moment was a turning point in our friendship and strengthened our bond. Curiosity overcame me day by day, growing stronger with every moment. I constantly fought the urge to look at her phone when she left it unattended. Kaylee was still hiding many details of her life, which only increased my doubts. It felt wrong to invade her privacy, but the temptation became irresistible. One fateful night, as she snored peacefully beside me, I succumbed to the urge and gave in to my curiosity. I distinctly remember the rapid beating of my heart, pounding in my chest as if it were about to burst. Every few minutes, I anxiously returned the phone to its original place, fearing the slightest sign that she had woken up. With trembling hands, I dug through her email, carefully looked through the photo gallery, leaving the messages for last. Doubts gnawed at me. I wasn't sure I was ready to uncover any unpleasant secrets. Perhaps I hoped there would be nothing to find, but my hopes quickly vanished when the truth revealed itself, shocking me to my core. The thought crossed my mind that she might have taken someone else's phone by mistake, but alas, it was indeed hers. As I scrolled through her text messages, I found undeniable evidence. Clear as day, I saw irrefutable proof that Kaylee was having inappropriate conversations with one of her clients. The realization hit me like a brick. and waves of nausea swept over me. Not only did she violate the ethical standards of her profession, but she also broke the trust and commitment we shared. Overwhelmed with anger, sadness, and disappointment, I turned to her, intending to confront her with the bitter truth. As I looked at her calmly sleeping body, a whirlwind of confusion and rage raged within me. The severity of her betrayal was unimaginable. I couldn't fathom how, after everything we had, she could stoop so low as to cheat on me, especially with one of her clients. Disgust seized me as I realized the enormity of her actions. It wasn't that I sided with this guy. In fact, I couldn't muster any dislike for him. On the contrary, I felt a deep sense of empathy. I understood that people who seek therapy are struggling with their mental health, vulnerable, and looking for guidance. It seemed she took advantage of his vulnerability, using his trust for her own selfish purposes. Betrayal and a sense of distrust overwhelmed me. How could one person cause such pain to another, especially someone in a position of trust like a therapist? The anger boiling within me was replaced by a feeling of disgust. At that moment, I didn't have the strength to feel sorry for myself. Instead, I spent the night meticulously going through their messages, delving into the depths of their flirtatious texts and intimate conversations. To my horror, it turned out that Kaylee was the initiator of most of these correspondences. She sent photos to which he eagerly responded, and she seemed desperate and hungry for his attention. It was insulting and painful to watch her actions unfold before my eyes. As I studied their messages, I realized the extent of her betrayal. It became clear that Kaylee initiated this inappropriate behavior almost immediately after starting her work as a therapist. The woman I once held in great respect turned out to be a complete disappointment, a manipulator repeating the actions of her past boyfriend. Everything I knew about her was shattered, and I realized she had deliberately let me believe I was to blame for our relationship problems. Anger bubbled in my veins, fueling a desire for revenge. Unable to bear lying next to her any longer, I realized it was time to plan my own retribution. Overwhelmed with anger, betrayal, and a need for justice, I couldn't allow her to continue living a life of deceit. The way she used and emotionally drained me was unforgivable. She had to experience the same pain and humiliation she inflicted on me. Determined to hold her accountable, I meticulously gathered all the evidence from her phone, incriminating text messages, photos, even the client's name. It didn't take long to find the licensing commission and file an official complaint. With a heavy heart but a sense of righteousness, I attached all the evidence, aiming to expose her actions and bring her professional misconduct to light. Despite the turmoil within me, I quietly hoped the consequences wouldn't severely impact the client. As expected, the licensing board acted quickly upon receiving the complaint, recognizing the gravity of the situation. I watched from the sidelines as the repercussions of her actions unfolded. All this time, I deliberately distanced myself from her, and she didn't even question it. She continued living as if nothing had happened until one fateful day when she returned home in complete horror. The consequences were severe and far-reaching. She not only lost her job, but also her license. The severity of these consequences hit her like a tidal wave, leaving her devastated and broken. Her actions were made public as a warning to others, destroying any semblance of privacy we once had. Our family and friends, upon learning of the incident, were disappointed and disheartened. In a surprising turn of events, her parents contacted me, apologizing for their daughter's behavior and expressing their disappointment. They assured me that despite the circumstances, I would always be welcome in their family. Although my own parents offered for me to return home for their care and support, I politely declined. I considered myself capable of navigating this difficult stage on my own. I was determined to stand on my own 2 feet, not relying on anyone else. Kaylee's life changed dramatically and suddenly, yet she had the audacity to turn to me for help. She confessed her love again, claiming I was all she needed. She insisted her betrayal was unintentional, attributing it to some incomprehensible forces that possessed her. Now she wanted to see a therapist, hoping to repair our broken relationship. But I couldn't believe a word she said. I understood that I had become her only remaining support, but I couldn't shake off a feeling of distrust. After Kaylee's actions became known, those who had previously supported her quickly distanced themselves. Even her parents turned away, severing all ties with their own daughter. I was tired of Kaylee's games and no longer wanted to be drawn into her insidious atmosphere. All I wanted was to break free and move on. Considering that only my name was on the apartment lease, I made the difficult decision to evict her from my home. She begged and sobbed, pleading not to be left alone, but I ignored her requests. She even refused to take the suitcases I had packed with her clothes and belongings. Despite feeling a pang of pity, I realized that I had to prioritize my own well-being and rid myself of this toxic relationship. With a heavy heart, I had to enlist the help of the building's security to remove Kaylee from the apartment. As she was escorted out, I told her that her belongings would be waiting for her downstairs. That was the end of my personal communication with Kaylee. In the following months, she tried to reach out, seeking reconciliation, but I deliberately ignored her attempts. Fortunately, I found solace in the support of my understanding and compassionate colleagues. They never uttered the words, "I told you so." Instead, they were ready to support me unconditionally during this difficult time. The last I heard, Kaylee was struggling, shuttling between motels and homeless shelters. She managed to get a job at a fast food restaurant, but in today's society, it takes much more to fully support oneself. I often wondered if I had done the right thing by seeking revenge, or if I could have handled it differently. But I constantly reminded myself that I didn't force Kaylee to cheat. I didn't force her into an inappropriate relationship with a client. Ultimately, only she was responsible for her choices. It's true that Kaylee could have cheated on someone else and potentially kept her job. Despite the difficulty of my decision, I believe it was the right thing to do, prioritizing my own well-being. While my actions may not have been solely guided by moral considerations, their consequences are clear. Parents and friends have distanced themselves from her, and I hope this serves as a valuable lesson for her future. I don't hate her, but I no longer want to be part of her life. Unfortunately, I cannot provide information about the client she was involved with, as I did not maintain any close ties with him. All I have is his name, so I have little information about his current situation. Despite my attempts to gather information, I found nothing. I sincerely hope he received the necessary help and support, no matter what he went through. That's all I can offer regarding his situation. As for me, life has significantly improved. I prioritize self-care and maintain strong relationships with family and friends. While I may fall in love again, I understand that not all women are the same. I can confidently say that I will no longer tolerate relationships where trust is violated or my well-being is jeopardized. A valuable lesson I've learned is that when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. This story underscores the importance of heeding those signs. It's been 5 years since I last saw Kaylee, but recently I accidentally ran into her in a supermarket parking lot. Kaylee wasn't alone. She had a little girl, about 3 years old, with her. It was noticeable that they were poorly dressed, barely making ends meet. When she saw me, I noticed joy in her eyes. While we talked about life, the little girl repeatedly told her mother, Kaylee, that she was hungry. Seeing Kaylee's reaction made my chest tighten. Tears welled up in her eyes as she confessed they had nothing to eat. I was shocked by their situation and suggested we stop by the nearest restaurant for lunch. The little girl clapped her hands with joy. While we ate, Kaylee told me that she had been involved with a terrible man who abandoned her while she was pregnant and was hiding to avoid paying child support. I also learned that she and her daughter live in a homeless shelter, and Kaylee works as a cleaner in a restaurant. Her parents want to take the girl to raise her until Kaylee gets her life back on track. As I listened to her story, tears streamed down my face. I wished her and her beautiful daughter good luck, paid the bill, and gave her a large sum of money. Then I left the restaurant, feeling a mix of sorrow and closure. I don't feel sorry for Kaylee herself, but for the poor little girl who was so tormented by her own mother's hopelessness. After that, I tried not to think about Kaylee and her daughter. Story 2. Recently, I have had suspicions that my wife, Sharon, is cheating on me with my boss, Jim. It's unpleasant to suspect that even her family might be involved in a plot to separate us. My name is Chuck Smith. I am 46 years old and 180 centimeters tall. For the past 12 years, Sharon and I have been living in a small town in West Virginia in a modest 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage. As an engineer, I am constantly confronted with the intrusive presence of my boss, Jim, who tries to manage me without having the slightest idea about my work responsibilities. Although he holds the position of head of sales, his actions often look more comical than authoritative. I work for hire, specializing in the development of surgical kits for hospitals. Interestingly, my wife Sharon holds the position of production manager at the same workplace and earns a higher income than me. Despite our shared professional environment, I can't shake the feeling that both Sharon and my colleagues are taking advantage of me. It seems they do not pay attention to my feelings and general well-being. Recently, I have had suspicions that my wife may be unfaithful. Although our intimacy happens 3 or 4 times a week, it is never particularly exciting or adventurous. Sharon is an attractive woman who prefers routine and is not afraid to try something new, but for a year now, she has not shown me even the simplest affection, like a kiss. I know that her family is discussing how to end our relationship since we have no children, and it's just the two of us navigating these uncertain conditions. The frequent visits of Sharon's mother and sister were accompanied by trips to bars, which made me feel anxious. From the very beginning, our marriage was viewed with skepticism, as I was told that my intentions were solely aimed at obtaining Sharon's financial assets. In connection with these suspicions, I was asked to sign a marriage contract, which I willingly did. It stipulated that in case of infidelity, the guilty party leaves the marriage only with the property they brought. I want to emphasize that I have never even had the thought of Sharon's infidelity. Moreover, I have reached an important stage in my professional activity, being on the verge of obtaining a patent for specialized surgical instruments, the value of which can be estimated in millions. It is worth noting that when I first conceived this idea, the company I worked for did not show any interest in partnering or supporting this endeavor. Despite my passion and dedication to the project, I faced obstacles in my workplace. The company categorically forbade me to work on my invention during working hours, threatening me with dismissal otherwise. Deciding to continue working, I set up a workspace in my home basement, allowing me to devote time to the project outside of work hours. But about 2 months ago, I made a shocking discovery. Video recording cameras had been installed in my work area without my knowledge. It seemed that my wife Sharon was the only person who knew about the progress of my work. To confirm my suspicions, I purchased several inexpensive video cameras. To my horror, the recordings revealed that my wife was talking on the phone with my boss, Jim. Although I could only hear her side of the conversation, it became painfully clear that they had been having an affair for over a year. I realized with dread that there was a conspiracy to steal my ideas. Among the evidence, I have recordings of Sharon's conversations with her mother, Jean, and sister, Joan. These conversations, conducted on speakerphone, allowed me to hear their discussions. To my horror, they openly talked about their plan to kick me out of our marriage and take my hard-earned money, or worse, subject me to extreme humiliation. Feeling overwhelmed by these revelations, I sought solace from my old army buddy, Tom. Although our roles during service didn't differ significantly, I was a heavy equipment operator, and he was a mechanic. I always found comfort in discussing my problems with him. Armed with the incriminating notes, I hoped Tom would provide valuable help and support. Tom, my loyal friend, offered a solution: move my work to his garage and focus on creating seemingly useless inventions for now. Following his advice, I quietly transferred my original developments to another computer, replacing them with mundane content on the old computer while keeping the same file names. I tried not to arouse Jim's suspicions. Additionally, I acquired more advanced cameras and recording devices, which allowed me to gather more information about their insidious plan. I placed these devices in key locations around the house: bedrooms, kitchen, and living room. The day after installing the cameras, I captured footage of Sharon and Jim engaging in intimate activity in our own bed. This was a stark contrast to Sharon's disinterest in intimacy with me. She looked very enthusiastic and pleased with Jim's actions. Their conversation revolved around me and their plans for the future once my ideas were ready for sale. I am at a loss as to what I could have done to cause such deep hostility towards me. The way Sharon talks about me reflects a complete disregard for our marital ties, reducing me not to a partner, but to a mere employee. It's painful to realize that she feels sincere contempt for me, viewing me solely as a means to develop ideas and perform household duties, rather than valuing our connection as a married couple. I have finished working on my ideas, but I want to give the impression that I will complete them only after a 2-week camping vacation. Jim informed the company owners that my ideas were worthless and only resulted in expenses for the company, so they will not be pursuing my project at this time. Jim is flying out on a business trip where he plans to sell my ideas while undermining my value. Additionally, Jim has engaged in inappropriate relationships with my sister-in-law, Jean, and mother-in-law, Joan. Apparently, Sharon is also involved, and it seems they all adhere to a bisexual orientation. If it weren't for their hostility towards me, I might have been inclined to join them. Watching them, I felt a strong excitement that led me to self-satisfaction. I intend to distribute videos of their actions to people in their church and family circle. It will be interesting to see how often Joan will attend religious services after this is done. In Jim's absence, Sharon decided to have an intimate relationship with me. She revealed herself to be a person of low moral qualities, and I considered accepting her offer, but ultimately refused, citing my health. When she tried to reminisce about our previous meetings, I reminded her that it was she who didn't want such communication. I told her I would sleep in the spare bedroom to avoid putting her at risk of getting sick. The company I work for tends to support Jim, not me, so getting fired won't bother me. I decided to withdraw my savings from my 401k and open a new retirement account with another company. I applied for a month's leave, hoping Jim might not guarantee my position upon my return. I mentioned that I was going camping for a couple of weeks and had some personal matters to attend to. I started taking my things out of the house, including tools, hunting and fishing supplies, and camping equipment. Sharon seemed to notice, commenting that it was high time for me to get my things in order. It's worth noting that Sharon has never shown interest in activities like hiking or anything else I wanted to do. Sometimes I wonder why she married me at all. Fortunately, in a neighboring town, I found a small house that can be rented for a month. It will be convenient for me to work on my projects there. Additionally, the house has a 2-car garage, so even if they drive by, they won't suspect that I live there. As for Cindy, the HR manager, and Sharon, they aren't concerned about discussing my 401k, as they have a strained relationship. Sharon and I run separate checking and savings accounts. It was her idea. I have a 6-year-old pickup truck with a 4x4 four-wheel drive, while she recently purchased a brand new BMW. Until now, I have been fully responsible for covering all household expenses, including phone bills, electricity, cable TV, and garbage collection. I also made credit card payments, but without her knowledge. I transferred all these bills to her name and deliberately stopped paying them starting last month. Tom suggested that I make a to-do list and gradually mark off the completed tasks. As part of this process, I have already cleaned out my closet and the chest of drawers where my clothes were stored. It's been quite a while since Sharon stopped washing my clothes. She never considered joining my camping trips, constantly asserting her superiority over me. Despite informing her about the planned 2-week hike, she showed a complete lack of interest. Instead, she casually mentioned that she, her mother, and sister were going to a bar. When I got home, I saw that she had already left, completely oblivious to my absence and the lack of conversation with her. In response, I quickly collected the remaining things that belonged to me, carefully searched the house for what I wanted to take, disassembled the bed in the spare room, selected a chest of drawers, and gathered some photos. Although there was nothing of significant value, I closed the door behind me and got into my truck without looking back. Important note, I successfully obtained the patent I was working on. In the first week, I managed to sell the kits for $5 million. But Jim immediately called and said that I was fired, stressing that he had warned me in advance about the consequences. Now he had to explain why new kits were not developed, why our customers did not place new orders, and why the expected new kits did not exist at all. To top it all off, I sent letters to our competitors divulging this information. For the next 3 weeks, I anxiously watched my phone for messages. Eventually, Sharon texted me, asking when I would be coming home. Neglecting my duties, I did not mow the lawn, knowing full well that she does not care about such issues. I still have the notes I made with her, Jim, her mother, and sister. Each entry was marked with her name on a piece of paper. The first entry contained a message in which I outlined my plans for my money. I also mentioned that copies of these recordings would be sent to her work colleagues, friends from church, and family members. Then something unexpected happened. My phone started ringing incessantly. She called me every 5 minutes, as did Jim, Jean, and Joan. She had found the records and only now realized that I left 3 weeks ago. In response, I began to send copies of all the records by mail, focusing on her workplace. I made sure that our friends and members of the church received copies of the recordings by posting them on various internet sites and specifying the appropriate site names. After that, I smashed my phone and enjoyed the chaos reigning around me. In addition, I sent a recording of Jim firing me to the company as proof of his actions. As a result, both Jim and Sharon were fired from their positions. With the funds received from the sale of the kits, I acquired a partial stake in one of our competitors. I had a relationship with Perry, the owner of the company, and I knew how well he treated his employees. His company was more like a friendly family business than one with an overly aggressive approach. I expressed to Perry my doubts about the possible impact on the city and emphasized the outstanding abilities of most of its employees. He was aware of my intentions and the opportunity to purchase equipment and a factory at a reduced price. As part of my efforts, I helped hire several design engineers for Perry and personally trained them to create kits that would meet the needs and preferences of hospitals. I also instructed them on how to provide excellent customer service. About a week after the factory reopened under Perry's leadership, Jim unexpectedly came in for an interview. During the interview, he claimed it was his merit that the old company remained afloat and even put in a good word for Sharon. Some thought that he and Sharon could just take matters into their own hands, but it was time for revenge. Unfortunately, we live in a world where marriages and divorces are so common, and I can't understand why people prefer to cheat on their spouses. After I made the decision to file for divorce, Sharon came with the expectation that she would soon receive financial benefits from the new company. She was furious that I had shifted all the house bills to her. When the meeting started, I decided not to participate in it. I watched from another room as my lawyer was ready. The first thing he did was put the seal on, and then he pressed the play button. It showed how they were all engaged in intimate activities, discussing how they were going to take my money and humiliate me by laughing at me all the time. I gave my lawyer a written power of attorney to handle the cases related to my divorce and told them that in 2 weeks I would check on them without letting them know where I was. On Monday morning, Sharon was handed divorce papers citing adultery. Under the threat of exposure in the media and a possible trial, she reluctantly signed the divorce papers. While signing the documents, she noted that she would soon earn well again. Although I wanted to sue Jim for alienation of affection, I found out that this is not allowed in Massachusetts, possibly due to the fact that many state politicians have faced similar lawsuits. Anyway, as part of my agreement with the new owners of the company, Jim and his associates lost their jobs and all his possessions disappeared. Sharon found herself in a difficult financial situation, owing more than she had in her bank account. Numerous creditors began to pursue her, her car was confiscated, and utilities were shut down, leaving her without electricity and water. Property taxes became unaffordable, and both mortgages expired. In addition, Sharon's parents' house was seriously damaged, and they were forced to use rented cars. It hurt me to think about the many problems they faced. When the situation worsened, Jim had no choice but to move in with Sharon's parents, as his own property was also vandalized. He even had to ask her parents for a rental car. All of them were forced to live in makeshift fortresses made of boxes. Sharon's lawyers made a serious mistake by trying to delay the divorce process. As a result, the case attracted considerable public attention, especially when explicit videos of their intimate relationship appeared on the internet. The audio recordings revealed the extent of their affair and showed that her entire family knew about it and even encouraged it. Shockingly, it turned out that the whole family conspired to publicly humiliate and ruin me, intending to confiscate my property and express disdain for the middle class. Convincing video and audio evidence emerged of how her family bribed politicians and corrupt officials, persecuting those who stood up for honesty and decency. I made sure that the incriminating evidence was posted on numerous sites known for hosting such content. As a result, the divorce case was successfully completed. However, the judge who was assigned to the case was forced to recuse himself after he was exposed as one of the corrupt officials bribed. On the day the divorce was finalized, the company organized an employee appreciation day and a grand opening of the store. To the surprise of Sharon, her sisters, mother, and Jim, they attended the event expecting to take control. I arranged for them to be seated at the front table during the event. Perry introduced me as the organizer of all the successes achieved. In a fit of anger, Sharon rushed at me, hurling insults and exclaiming, "You bastard! You're a sandbag!" All attention was focused on us. Everyone was listening attentively. I explained to Sharon that my presence at the divorce proceedings was completely optional since she was given the right to choose. It was important that everyone present knew the truth, so selected recordings were played on the big TV screen, with explicit parts obscured and some fragments of the conversation cut out. In response to Jim's threat to bring the old owners to court against me, accusing me of sabotaging the company's work, I played a recording of his dismissal. The recording was clearly dated and provided indisputable proof of his actions. To further strengthen my position, I introduced 2 new design engineers and asked them to confirm who designed the new kits. Their response was a convincing confirmation that it was my experience and development that led to the successful creation of the new kits. I had a preliminary conversation with the previous owners and offered to return to the company with a well-deserved salary increase, but they rejected my offer, and I have a record of our conversation. Moreover, I possess a memo signed by Jim, which clearly states that the special tools I have been working on belong exclusively to me and are not related to the company's projects. The memo even contained a warning that any attempt on my part to work with them would lead to dismissal. This documentary evidence left them without weighty arguments, and they were well aware of their weak position. By supporting Jim against me, they were defeated. As a result, all employees of the new company received a salary increase and improved benefits packages. This was done only for those employees with whom I had a relationship and who, in my opinion, deserved recognition and promotion. Hard-working employees who demonstrated their competence at work received well-deserved promotions. Taking Cindy aside, I tried to protect her from the problems associated with my ex. I asked her to let me know immediately if she had any issues and promised that she could tell me everything without fear. I understood the manipulative nature of my ex and emphasized that Cindy's reliability in my eyes remained unshakable. Moreover, I appointed her head of the department, expressing confidence in her ability to handle the responsibility. I encouraged her to seek clarification if she had any questions, assuring her that she should not hesitate to ask for help. Finally, I promised to visit her periodically to provide support and advice. A few years passed, and I found out through friends in the city that someone was interested in my whereabouts. Additionally, I learned from my ex-wife's email that they had managed to locate me. One night, 2 people parked their car near my property, trying to approach unnoticed. But I was ready for their appearance, having installed video surveillance. When they forced their way into my house, I defended myself by shooting at them, not to kill, but to wound. My reaction took them by surprise. It seemed like they wanted to hurt me. There was a proposal to use rock salt cartridges instead of steel shot, but that only happens in the movies. After neutralizing the threat, I examined their car and took everything of value that I wanted. I immediately contacted the state police and informed them about the incident, with two persons who tried to harm me but were now detained and under my protection. The next morning, the state police promptly arrived at the scene and arrested the criminals, collecting evidence of their intentions. Despite their claims that they got lost and were just looking for the road, CCTV footage showed a different truth, backed up by evidence found in their car. The criminals spent several weeks in the hospital recovering from their injuries and then were transferred to prison. During this time, they told the police about their employers and the specific tasks they were assigned to perform. I decided to visit a restaurant that I knew her family frequented. As they passed by me, they did not notice my presence. Over time, my appearance had changed significantly. I now had long gray hair, a beard, and my physical shape had improved. Wanting to make my presence known, I asked the waiter to bring a bottle of champagne to their table. The whole family had aged noticeably, as if 2 decades had flown by in an instant. Their eyes fell on me, and after a few seconds, Sharon suddenly exclaimed, "My God, you're a freak!" When she recognized me, she immediately began to tell the rest of her family about my identity. In a fit of anger, Sharon rushed to me, showering insults and accusing me of destroying her family. Amid this chaos, her sister called the police, which led to my subsequent arrest. Realizing the potential legal difficulties, I asked the waiter to contact a lawyer on my behalf, as I doubted the police would allow me to do so. Fortunately, the lawyer quickly arrived and reviewed the CCTV footage, which eventually led to my release. The recording showed me calmly sending champagne to their table and having a polite conversation with them. It was clear that I was not a threat and just wanted to play them. If not for the careful planning and preparation on the part of my lawyers, including obtaining copies of surveillance footage in advance, I doubt the police would have released me, given their friendly relations with my mother-in-law. After the incident, Sharon contacted me by calling my hotel room and requesting a conversation to ensure transparency and accountability. I agreed to meet her in the hotel lobby, recording our communication. She approached me, demanding an explanation for my actions toward her and her family. I looked at her with surprise and disbelief, maintaining my composure. I calmly explained that my actions were a necessary measure to protect myself from their intentions. I told her that I discovered her affair with Jim, which further complicated our situation. I asked, during this time, they told the police about their employers and the specific tasks they were assigned to perform. I decided to go to a restaurant that I knew her family frequented. Passing by me, they did not notice my presence. Over time, my appearance had changed significantly. I now had long gray hair, a beard, and my physical shape had improved. Wanting to make myself known, I asked the waiter to bring a bottle of champagne to their table. The whole family had aged noticeably, as if 2 decades had flown by in an instant. Their eyes fell on me, and after a few seconds, Sharon suddenly exclaimed, "My God, you're a freak!" When she recognized me, she immediately began to tell the rest of her family about my identity. In a fit of anger, Sharon rushed at me, showering insults and accusing me of destroying her family. Amid this chaos, her sister called the police, which led to my subsequent arrest. Realizing the possible legal difficulties, I asked the waiter to contact a lawyer on my behalf, doubting that the police would give me permission to do so. Fortunately, the lawyer quickly arrived and reviewed the CCTV footage, which eventually led to my release. The recording showed me calmly sending champagne to their table and having a polite conversation with them. It was clear that I was not a threat and just wanted to play a trick on them. If not for the careful planning and preparation on the part of my lawyers, including the preliminary receipt of copies of surveillance footage, I doubt that the police would have allowed my release, given their friendly relations with my mother-in-law. After the incident, Sharon contacted me by calling my hotel room and asking for a conversation. During this time, they told the police about their employers and the specific tasks they were assigned to perform. I decided to go to a restaurant that I knew her family frequented. Passing by me, they did not notice my presence. Over time, my appearance had changed significantly. I now had long gray hair, a beard, and my physical shape had improved. Wanting to make myself known, I asked the waiter to bring a bottle of champagne to their table. The whole family had aged noticeably, as if 2 decades had flown by in an instant. Their eyes fell on me, and after a few seconds, Sharon suddenly exclaimed, "My God, you're a freak!" When she recognized me, she immediately began to tell the rest of her family about my identity. In a fit of anger, Sharon rushed at me, showering insults and accusing me of destroying her family. Amid this chaos, her sister called the police, which led to my subsequent arrest. Realizing the possible legal difficulties, I asked the waiter to contact a lawyer on my behalf, doubting that the police would give me permission to do so. Fortunately, the lawyer quickly arrived and reviewed the CCTV footage, which eventually led to my release. The recording showed me calmly sending champagne to their table and having a polite conversation with them. It was clear that I was not a threat and just wanted to play a trick on them. If not for the careful planning and preparation on the part of my lawyers, including the preliminary receipt of copies of surveillance footage, I doubt that the police would have allowed my release, given their friendly relations with my mother-in-law. After the incident, Sharon contacted me by calling my hotel room and asking for a conversation to ensure transparency and accountability. I agreed to meet her in the lobby of the hotel, providing a record of our communication. She approached me, demanding an explanation of my actions towards her and her family. I looked at her with surprise and disbelief, keeping calm. I calmly explained that my actions were a necessary measure to protect myself from their intentions. I told her that I found out about her affair with Jim, which further complicated our situation. I asked her why she decided to marry me if she disliked me so much, but I didn't mention that the whole house was wired, and I knew about her actions thanks to espionage. The consequences of their actions were obvious. She lost her job, house, and cars. Jim suffered the same fate, and they had to move in with her parents. Her answer made me hesitate because she casually brushed off the situation, saying that there was nothing personal about it. During our conversation, Sharon admitted that she initially entered into an affair to avoid the influence of her family. But she admitted that it gave her pleasure to manipulate me and use my actions for her own entertainment. She said that they enjoyed the idea that after Jim, I would communicate with her. Perplexed, I asked why she didn't just file for divorce when she first met Jim. She replied that at that time, she was pleased, and by staying married to me, she believed that she could achieve anything she wanted. After reflecting on her words, I decided not to engage in further conversation and quietly left. The next day, I decided to leave, freed from the toxic environment and enjoying the fact that I turned their lives around financially, emotionally, and socially. For me, this outcome was much more pleasant than revenge with violence. I will constantly live in their thoughts. Story: my name is Dave, and my wife is Olivia. We have been happily married for several years. As a purchasing manager, I devoted myself to work while Olivia pursued her career as a banker. But amid the seeming normality of our life, one unpleasant truth emerged. Olivia had a tendency to leave her belongings scattered around the house, often out of place and forgotten. "Have you seen my comb?" or "Where are my earrings?" became the usual questions that she often asked. It seems that Olivia is used to counting on me to keep an eye on her many things, perhaps believing that I will always come to the rescue if she loses something. In the early years of our marriage, I made the mistake of cleaning up after her and taking the blame for losing things. But soon, I realized that my attempts to be helpful were useless, and I switched to a new approach of leaving her things untouched. This decision was dictated by the desire to avoid possible accusations and misunderstandings. One morning, while walking through the house, I noticed Olivia's purse abandoned at the top of the stairs. Considering this as another example of her carelessness, I made a conscious choice to leave it untouched. With this decision, I went down to the kitchen and started cooking breakfast, trying to maintain a sense of normality amid the growing tension in our relationship. Olivia is used to staying in bed until I make a cup of fresh Vietnamese Sang Tao coffee and preheat bread in the oven. While enjoying the aroma of coffee, I was startled by an unexpected scream, followed by a series of ominous sounds: crashing, knocking, and heart-rending moans of pain. I immediately realized that Olivia had fallen down the stairs. Worried about her well-being, I rushed to her. Fortunately, it turned out that she didn't suffer any fractures. A doctor who examined her at a local hospital recommended a routine checkup on Monday morning to make sure there were no hidden injuries. With a sigh of relief, we returned home in the afternoon. This incident cast a shadow over our weekend, forcing us to spend it in quiet reflection. After taking painkillers, Olivia spent most of her time in bed, having long conversations with her mother and numerous friends on her mobile phone. According to my information, she also indulged in superficial communication on the internet, and my role seemed to have turned into that of a butler or a nurse, providing for her needs during the recovery period. On Sunday morning, Olivia went out into the garden to get some fresh air. Unfortunately, the weather was not very pleasant, and she quickly returned to the house. Left alone, I took up autumn chores, pruning bushes and cleaning fallen leaves. By the will of fate, our neighbor Jacob, an experienced builder by profession, lived nearby. We were both doing the same thing, and when Olivia came into the house, Jacob stopped his work and walked up to the garden wall, clearly wanting to talk to me. "Hi, Dave," he greeted. "I saw your wife this morning. Is she all right?" "She'll be fine," I replied. "How did it happen?" "Well, she put all the blame on me," I confessed. "She said that it was I who didn't put away her purse on the stairs, and because of that, she fell." Jacob seemed shocked. "Wow, did she really say that?" he asked. "Yes," I confirmed. "Regardless, I believe she has learned her lesson." Jacob still looked a little puzzled. He noticed. "I must say that you are showing understanding given the current situation. If Olivia needs someone to lean on, Marjorie can be very reserved." After that, Jacob continued gardening, leaving me slightly perplexed. Although Jacob's wife, Marjorie, was a pleasant woman, I found it curious that he felt it necessary to assure me of her prudence. Perhaps he was concerned about the local gossip surrounding Olivia's accident. On Monday morning, I took Olivia to the hospital and waited for her to be examined. I contacted my boss and informed him that I would be a little late. Olivia's admission to the hospital took longer than expected, as she was interviewed individually due to the fact that domestic violence could have been involved in her injuries. It's better to be safe than sorry. In the end, I took Olivia to the bank where she works as a loan specialist and got to my office closer to mid-morning. My work schedule as a purchasing manager assumes some flexibility, and I have my own separate room. Not because I occupy any special position, but the main reason I have a separate office is to ensure complete confidentiality during meetings with suppliers and colleagues. Shortly after I took my office that morning, Olivia's friends and colleagues started calling me. The privacy of my own space turned out to be very useful in this situation. It became obvious that they all doubted Olivia's explanation that she had fallen down the stairs. All the callers, women, did not believe in Olivia's clumsiness. They asked me to calm them down and even threatened. Despite my assertions of innocence, they remained firm in their opinion. Olivia's closest friend at the bank expressed the hope that despite my agreement with the story about her black eye, I would exercise restraint if I ever felt the desire to get angry with Olivia. Later in the afternoon, the news of Olivia's injury apparently reached our office, most likely through Amelia's husband, George, who was her colleague. Anyway, our boss, Jimmy, came to visit me. Jimmy and I have always maintained a positive working relationship and have been open with each other. But when he asked if I needed a vacation to solve possible domestic problems, I was caught off guard. When I hesitated with an answer, he continued, offering to see a psychologist or undergo treatment for anger to help resolve the situation. It became clear to me that the more I denied my wrongdoing, the less confidence my words aroused. Trying to mitigate the situation, I just began to assure him that everything was fine and insisted that there was no need to escalate it into a serious incident. By the end of the day, I was tired of stubbornly defending my innocence. When I came home in the evening, I was met by our neighbor, Steve, who told me that kicking my wife is not the best way to get revenge. I just replied, "You're absolutely right, Steve," as I continued down the path to our front door and prepared to unlock it. His words wouldn't leave my mind. What exactly was he hinting at? Maybe he was mistaken about what happened and made a false conclusion. If it were so, it would be easier for him to say that kicking his wife is completely unacceptable. It would be clear and straightforward. But why did he think I wanted revenge? Maybe Steve decided that Olivia had caused some damage to our property, like the car or my favorite shirt. It's strange that he assumed I could resort to anger and violence towards her, regardless of the circumstances. Olivia returned home earlier than usual, as she was ordered to take sick leave until the end of the week. Apparently, the bank felt that she needed time to rest and recover, or more likely, they did not want her bruised face to be seen by customers. Olivia expressed her fears that people might doubt her explanation for falling down the stairs. It was noticeable that she was facing the same problem as me. Olivia just shrugged and replied, "Well, people will believe what they want to believe. There's nothing we can do about it if some people create their own version of reality." I didn't see any point in telling her how hard her friends and colleagues had been on me, so I continued to cook dinner and we ate in silence. After that, we watched some TV and then went to bed. On Tuesday morning, I noticed George glancing in my direction as I sat in my office. In the end, he cornered me at the water cooler, and after making sure that there was no one within earshot, he spoke. "Look, Dave," he began. "Amelia thinks Martin isn't forgetful, and he knows Olivia didn't just fall down the stairs." George told Amelia that he regretted contacting Olivia and thought it was better for him to distance himself from her so as not to complicate the relationship. I was completely overwhelmed by this revelation. It was amazing. I must have stared at George for a long time in disbelief because I didn't say a word. Sensing my stunned silence, George hurriedly continued, "I know it's a lot to ask, Dave, but please think about it. After all, he has a wife and children." He turned away, leaving me standing there speechless. George took my silence as a refusal to enter into a conversation on this topic. In fact, I was completely shocked by his revelation. Sitting in my office afterward, I tried to make sense of what George had told me. The only Martin that came to my mind was Martin Locke, Olivia's boss at the bank. I had spoken to Martin and his wife Vanessa, who had an unprecedented strength during last year's annual party for employees. If George's statement was true, then it suggested that Olivia was connected to Martin in a more personal capacity than their professional relationship. Given that the information came from Amelia, Olivia's closest friend at the bank, it seemed extremely unlikely that this was a misunderstanding. I was overcome by a feeling of numbness, but I understood that it was necessary to understand what was happening. Deciding to go home and discuss the situation with my wife, I asked Jimmy for a day off. Given Jimmy's lack of surprise, he most likely believed that his assessment of the circumstances was correct, and I did nothing to change this opinion. As I arrived home, I noticed a silver Lexus parked at our entrance. I decided to park the car around the corner and walk to our house, curious about who might be visiting Olivia and whether we would have to postpone our heart-to-heart conversation. As I approached the house, I noticed that the garage door was open. With a sense of anticipation, I entered the garage and headed for the kitchen, half expecting to find Olivia and her friend there over a cup of coffee. To my surprise, the kitchen was empty, but I could clearly hear a man's voice coming from the living room. It suddenly dawned on me that Martin had chosen this time for his intimate conversation with Olivia, not knowing that I was not at work. Remembering the previous communication with the neighbors, I realized that Martin most likely often visited our house when I was not at home. Standing in silence in the hallway, I heard him say, "I'm sorry, but I have to hurry, dear. I'd love to stay and keep you company, but I have a meeting this afternoon that I can't reschedule. Are you sure you're going to be okay? I'm glad we settled everything, but I still find it hard to believe that you really fell down the stairs." Olivia reassured him, her voice full of conviction. "You're very caring, Martin, but I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I really did fall down the stairs." George told Amelia that he regretted contacting Olivia and thought it was better for him to distance himself from her so as not to complicate the relationship. I was completely overwhelmed by this revelation. It was amazing. I must have stared at George for a long time in disbelief because I didn't say a word. Sensing my stunned silence, George hurriedly continued, "I know it's a lot to ask, Dave, but please think about it. After all, He has a wife and children." He turned away, leaving me standing there as it should be, without words. George took my silence as a refusal to enter into a conversation on this topic. In fact, I was completely shocked by his revelation. Sitting in my office afterward, I tried to make sense of what George had told me. The only Martin that came to my mind was Martin Locke, Olivia's boss at the bank. I had spoken to Martin and his wife Vanessa, who had unprecedented strength during last year's annual party for employees. If George's statement was true, then it suggested that Olivia was connected to Martin in a more personal capacity than their professional relationship. Given that the information came from Amelia, Olivia's closest friend at the bank, it seemed extremely unlikely that this was a misunderstanding. I was overcome by a feeling of numbness, but I understood that it was necessary to understand what was happening. Deciding to go home and discuss the situation with my wife, I asked Jimmy for a day off. Given Jimmy's lack of surprise, he most likely believed that his assessment of the circumstances was correct, and I did nothing to change this opinion. Arriving at the house, I noticed a silver Lexus parked at our entrance. I decided to park the car around the corner and walk to our house, curious about who might be visiting Olivia and whether we would have to postpone our heart-to-heart conversation. As I approached the house, I noticed that the garage door was open. With a sense of anticipation, I entered the garage and headed for the kitchen, half expecting to find Olivia and her friend there over a cup of coffee. To my surprise, the kitchen was empty, but I could clearly hear a man's voice coming from the living room. It suddenly dawned on me that Martin had chosen this time for his intimate conversation with Olivia, not knowing that I was not at work. Remembering the previous communication with the neighbors, I realized that Martin most likely often visited our house when I was not at home. Standing in silence in the hallway, I heard him say, "I'm sorry, but I have to hurry, dear. I'd love to stay and keep you company, but I have a meeting this afternoon that I can't reschedule. Are you sure you're going to be okay? I'm glad we settled everything, but I still find it hard to believe that you really fell down the stairs." Olivia reassured him, her voice full of conviction. "You're very caring, Martin, but I've said it before and I'll say it again. I really did fall down the stairs." She paused for a moment before continuing. "I tripped over my purse. Dave would never have raised a hand against me, and if he had, I wouldn't have tolerated it. So Martin, please don't worry. I'll see you Thursday night as we usually do. Now go." After listening to Olivia's confident answer, I quietly withdrew through the kitchen and left the house through the back door, finding solace in her garden behind the garage. I struggled with nausea and anger caused by Olivia's apparent betrayal. On Thursday evenings, I usually go bowling and have lunch with work colleagues, returning home around 11 p.m. Observing the close communication between Olivia and Martin, I realized that they had become closer while I remained completely unaware of their actions. I understood that if I confronted them right away, it would most likely lead to a direct denial, which would only arouse their suspicions. Given the deep resentment I felt, I had no desire to prolong my participation in this marriage longer than necessary. It became clear to me that if I wanted to put an end to this situation, it was necessary to have irrefutable evidence. When the rudiments of a plan appeared in my head, I realized that I could use the next day or so to carefully work out the details and implement my strategy. After making sure that Martin had left, I returned to the car along the secluded alley behind our house, trying not to catch Olivia's eye. It is unpleasant to understand how cleverly a person can deceive their spouse when faced with the fact of infidelity. After lunch, I decided to take a walk under the warm autumn sun and returned home at the usual time. To my surprise, Olivia cooked one of my favorite Spanish dishes, chicken with saffron rice. Was there a sense of guilt in her actions? I couldn't be sure, but I didn't have the slightest desire to throw away good food. Despite the fact that it was a weekday, I decided to uncork a bottle of exquisite Spanish dry white wine to complement our meal. "Are we celebrating something, Dave?" Olivia asked. I answered somewhat ambiguously. "In a way, important events are taking place at work, and I think I may be on the verge of solving a difficult issue." I preferred not to specify that these two issues were not related in any way. Olivia, on the contrary, decided to use her day off by devoting Wednesday to household chores. But given the obvious discoloration of her face, which showed an intriguing mixture of black and yellow from bruises, she did not want to buy groceries. When I offered to take over all the shopping for the rest of the week, Olivia seemed pleased. On Wednesday and Thursday, I would have enough time to make changes to our bank accounts and credit cards, I thought. Thursday afternoon seemed to drag on indefinitely, but eventually it was time to leave the office. My colleagues on the bowling team were surprised when I decided to take my leave after we arrived at the bowling alley, but it was not difficult to find a replacement. There were plenty of enthusiastic players on the court, and there was no doubt that my replacement would show better results than I usually did. After I drove to Martin and Vanessa's house, parking the car on the next street around 7 o'clock, I watched as Martin left the house, got into his silver Lexus, and drove away. I decided to wait another half hour and then drive a short distance to their house. Getting out of the car, I walked up to the front door. Vanessa, of course, was surprised by my appearance. Although I didn't have a deep connection with her, she seemed to me one of those caring, strong maternal figures we talked about at the staff party. I decided to take a chance, believing that she would be sympathetic to this, given that Martin must have informed her about the alleged accident with Olivia when she fell down the stairs. Having come up with a plan, I turned to Vanessa and said, "Olivia suddenly had an emergency related to a women's issue. I haven't been able to contact any of her friends to help. Could you come by to see if you can offer any assistance?" Without hesitation, Vanessa took her coat and bag, and we set off on the way. I calculated that before Vanessa and I arrived, Olivia and Martin had about an hour to go about their business. Interestingly, Vanessa didn't notice Martin's silver Lexus parked unnoticed down the street. As soon as I unlocked the front door and entered, it became clear that my calculations were correct. The sounds of moaning and groaning coming from the living room immediately attracted Vanessa's attention, and an expression of deep concern appeared on her face. She thought Olivia was experiencing suffering or pain. Pushing Vanessa towards the living room, I left the front door slightly ajar, waiting for Martin to leave. Soon I wasn't disappointed. He left quickly. As soon as Vanessa recovered from the initial shock of seeing Martin in bed with my wife, she resolutely took action. Vanessa wielded her purse like a formidable battle axe, the weight of which seemed to exceed 10 pounds, bringing down streams of screams on Martin and Olivia. I distinctly remember Olivia's face trying to get out of the chaos. At some point, fortunately, you shouldn't rely on your memory because I prudently set up my mobile phone for video shooting, capturing most of the tense confrontation from the moment Vanessa entered the room. As expected, Martin quickly grabbed his trousers and hurriedly retreated, jumping out as expected through the front door. By this time, Vanessa's energy had noticeably dried up, and Olivia was sitting in the corner, holding her head in her hands and sobbing. "I'm sorry, Vanessa," I said with genuine remorse in my voice. "I wasn't going to bring you here under false pretenses, but I knew you wouldn't believe me if I revealed the truth." Offering to take her home, Vanessa directed her anger at me, throwing out a barrage of insults, but I stubbornly continued to lead her to my car. Olivia made the decision to move in with her mother, and subsequently, we put the house up for sale. I admit that she is primarily to blame for the destruction of our marriage, attributing it to her selfishness. Olivia's actions paint her as a deceitful and selfish person, but I don't hold a grudge against her because Vanessa administered much-needed justice. Since the day we left the courthouse after the divorce was finalized, I have never seen Olivia. Almost a year has passed since that moment. Although I'm still single, I'm happy to date different women. I currently have a wonderful girlfriend that I trust, but I decided to stay away from bowling.